There's nothing here anymore, but something significant happened here in Lathrop, California on August 14th, 1889 that sent shockwaves throughout the entire country. The news event that I'm speaking of happened to be the murder of a former Chief Justice of the California State Supreme Court. It just so happened that fate brought together David Terry, who was a former Chief Justice of the California State Supreme Court, who was a political enemy of an associate of the U.S. Supreme Court, Stephen Field. And what happened was mind-blowing. Hi, so welcome to another episode of History Hunters. I'm here in Lathrop, California. It's a San Joaquin County town that had an important stop here along the railroad that connected the East Coast and the West Coast, the Transcontinental Railroad. This town was named after Leland Stanford's wife's family, the Lathrops. Leland Stanford tried to work with the city of Stockton to have this rail line go through that community. He decided that they were taking too much time, so he decided to bring the rail line through here. This was the location for the Lathrop train station. It had a restaurant. It was right there behind me. As you can see, there's nothing there. I happen to think that the eucalyptus trees were here planted at that time. They've long since taken down the depot, but it was in that building back there where there was a deadly shooting between a U.S. Marshal who was defending a Supreme Court Justice, Stephen Field, who happened to be traveling here and had the unfortunate incident of being in this depot at the same time as his arch enemy. David Terry got what was coming to him, and I think just karma bit him right in the butt. He was just out of control. The Texan of large physical stature who came to California in 1849 repeatedly found himself in trouble. He committed numerous assaults between 1849 and 1855. Always carrying a large Bowie knife in his breast pocket, he once stabbed a Sterling Hopkins in San Francisco during an altercation. One day in September 1859, after he resigned as California's top justice, Terry participated in a duel near Lake Merced in San Francisco after friend and U.S. Senator David Broderick called him a liar. Terry was the first to fire his gun, and Broderick was mortally wounded. He managed to beat the murder charge, probably because of his stature as a former Chief Justice. Terry moved to Texas in 1863 to fight for the Confederates during the Civil War, but he was back in Stockton in 1870. Now, the incident that led up to the murder of David Terry was a lawsuit that happened between Sarah Althea Hill and her lover, who was Senator William Sharon, who was a very wealthy man. When he passed away, she claimed that she was married to Mr. Sharon. He made a lot of money over the years. He was involved in some banking, some mines in Virginia City. Now, William Sharon lived in the Palace Hotel in San Francisco, a very lavish lifestyle. He had an adjoining room that he kept Sarah in. Now, things went bad between the senator and Sarah. He decided he was going to break it off. He was actually paying her about $500 a month, which at that time was about $15,000 a month, and she just would not allow the relationship to be over. So she kept forcing herself upon him. He finally evicted her from the room by having the carpets ripped up and the door hinges removed, along with $75,000 payment that he made to her to make her go away. When he began a relationship with another woman, Sarah claimed to be his wife and sued him for adultery. One of her attorneys was David S. Terry. Now, Sharon countersued, claiming that the marriage contract that she produced was fraudulent. After the death of his first wife, Cornelia, in 1884, David Terry became romantically involved with one of his clients, Sarah Althea Hill. They were married in 1886. David was 63, Sarah was 36. After Senator Sharon passed away, Sarah decided she wanted a cut of his estate, so she claimed that she was his legal wife. Of course, Sharon's children disputed the fact that they were married. There were no official documents. Now, this document that she produced was a handwritten document that supposedly was some kind of proof that she was married to Senator Sharon. That was disputed in court, and it went through a long, protracted legal battle. David Terry represented his wife in the trial, and she sued in court for his estate. As was a custom at the time, U.S. Supreme Court Justice Stephen Fields was assigned to assist the California Circuit Court to the Sharon versus Sharon case. I wish somebody would make a movie about this, because what happened in the courtroom after Fields said that the will was a complete phony, complete chaos erupted. David Terry was enraged. Sarah stood up, started screaming obscenities. She was going to go for the gun in her purse. David Terry rose. He was indignant. He started to reach for a Bowie knife in his breast pocket. Now, U.S. Marshal John Franks was in the courtroom. He rose, lunged forward to get control of Mr. Terry, and Mr. Terry actually knocked him in the jaw and knocked his tooth out. Justice Fields would not tolerate that kind of conduct in his courtroom, so he decided that he was going to send Sarah to jail for a month and send David Terry to jail for about 6 months. That was the punishment for their conduct in the courtroom. They also had breathed threats to kill Justice Fields that entire time, and being that they were such hotheads and always carried weapons, everybody believed that they would carry that out.
After their arrest and conviction for their courtroom outburst of 1888, David Terry and Sarah were not shy about expressing their hatred of Field. As she was being taken to the county jail in Alameda, Sarah repeated murderous threats against Justice Field. David Terry was so angry that during a jailhouse interview he told newspaper reporter Thomas Williams that one day he would slap the justice and that if he resisted, quote, "I will kill him." His remarks made print, and that's when it became apparent that Field needed a bodyguard, and thus David Nagel was hired.
Just so happened that David Terry was riding on the train with his wife. He happened to be on the same train that Terry was on. When the train arrived here about 7 a.m., everybody decided to get off, have breakfast inside the restaurant. That's where David Terry and Justice Fields saw each other. And of course, there was the immediate fear that there was going to be trouble. So the conductor tried to contact the constable here in town. Sharon-Hill decided she was going to go back on the train and recover her gun that she kept in her satchel. While she was in the train somewhere out here, that's when all hell broke loose. So inside the restaurant, full view of everybody, Terry goes over to Justice Fields and proceeds to slap him in the face, knocking his glasses off. So what Justice Terry probably didn't know is that there was a U.S. Marshal, David Nagel, who was assigned to protect Justice Fields. He immediately rose to his defense. He pulled out his gun and he says, "Stop, I'm an agent of the law." David Terry continued his assault. What happened next is kind of controversial. We don't know exactly if David Terry was reaching in to get his knife so he could stab the justice. However, Marshal Nagel was not going to take any of it. He opened fire on him, shot him once in the chest, and then I understand he aimed for his head and nicked his ear or something. Sharon-Hill Terry heard the gunshots while she was on the train. She ran back to the restaurant, probably assuming that something happened with her husband. She found him mortally wounded on the floor. She made this big dramatic scene where she was crying over the body of her husband, saying, "You killed my husband, you killed my husband." And allegedly she reached into his jacket and retrieved the knife that was on him, kind of thereby making it appear that he was completely defenseless. So after the shooting, Field told everybody in the audience that Terry had assaulted him and that his officer shot him. Nagel and Field reboarded the train and locked themselves in their cabin. Sarah Terry attempted to enter their car, saying she wished to slap the justice. Nagel insisted that she stay away or he would kill her too. The satchel that she fetched from the train was searched and a pistol was found in it. Now, as far as Deputy Nagel goes, there was an immediate arrest warrant put out for him, and even though he may have been trigger happy, he was still a U.S. Marshal who was hired to protect a Supreme Court Justice of the United States. However, Sheriff Thomas Cunningham wanted to arrest him and bring charges against him. There was a long, protracted deal with that. Nagel beat the charges because he was a marshal. He was successful in proving that he was only acting to protect the life of Justice Fields. So a few minutes after the shooting, Constable Walker of Lathrop and Stanislaus County Sheriff Purvis arrived. Nagel provided a document issued by the U.S. Attorney General appointing him as a special marshal to protect Field. Another interesting historical note about Nagel is that he was elected the town marshal of Tombstone after the shooting of Morgan Earp. It's also been said that while he was a law enforcement officer in Cochise County in Arizona, that he arrested Johnny Ringo, Doc Holliday, and Sherman McMaster. After the reputation that he established, Nagel was employed as a Southern Pacific Railroad police officer and bodyguard for dignitaries. Sarah Althea Hill Terry also had an unfortunate end. Her final years were also punctuated by the fact that she would wander aimlessly, talking crazy on the streets of San Francisco. So she had quite a reputation for losing her mind. Probably another bit of karma in that she was disowned by her family. She turned to a spiritualist to try to make contact with her dead husband. She eventually lost her mind and was committed to the State Insane Asylum in Stockton, where she spent her final years. So right across the street is this Tio Luis Mexican cuisine, and there's a marker, a historical marker, on a stone across the street. Unfortunately, I can see it's been stolen. This is a common problem throughout California. Look at this. Somebody decided to steal the whole marker. Isn't that pathetic? I mean, you can't have anything nice. Some people just have to destroy it.
The historic marker that was once affixed to this rock presented a brief account of the story of the shooting that I just related to you, and mentioned that the old railroad restaurant was across the street from this spot.
Right across the street here is the post office. This was a very historical establishment at one time, and it looks like most of the history that was here has been wiped out, which is always sad to see. So once again, I find myself in the Stockton Rural Cemetery because I want to show you where David Terry and his wife Sarah are buried. Here off to the side, close to the eastern boundary of the cemetery, you will see a giant obelisk marker here for David Terry, but he's got 3 markers here actually. It's crazy. David Smith Terry, Texas. He was a colonel in the Texas Cavalry, Confederate States Army. He lived from 1823 to 1889, and I see that somebody has left an American flag on his grave. Now, this grand marker kind of is a statement about his ego. So even though David Terry shot one of his best friends and later a political adversary and Senator David Broderick, he still remained a popular figure here in Stockton, where he continued to practice law. But for a while he had left the state. He had been acquitted of the charges, but he decided to leave the state anyway. He came back to Stockton. This would be Cornelia Terry McClure, 1882 to 1949. Assuming that is the son, Clinton Terry, born March 29, 1859, and he died in 1931. And before I get to Sarah's grave, I want to show you, here's the marker, original marker for David S. Terry. Says he died August 14th, 1889. He was 67. His fame, his best epitaph. Fortunately, he didn't have to die, but just because of the kind of person he was, that's what happened. Over here's Samuel Terry, born in 1855. Maybe another child, died in 1885. And here's the simple marker for Sarah Althea Terry. She died February 14th, 1937. A not so interesting marker for a very interesting person.
After her husband's death, Sarah Terry became obsessed with spiritualism, hiring mediums to put her in touch with David Terry. By February 1892, newspapers were reporting that Sarah Terry was insane. She wandered aimlessly in the streets of San Francisco, disheveled and talking to herself. She had periods of violence and believed that she was being tormented by electricity and hypnotism. Abandoned by her relatives, Sarah Terry's fate was left to the only friends that she had left, Porter Ashe and Mary Ellen Pleasant. Pleasant initiated actions to have Terry committed to an insane asylum. After a brief examination by the Insanity Commission, Sarah Terry was committed to the California Asylum at Stockton, later known as the Stockton State Hospital, on March 11, 1892. She remained there for 45 years, dying there at the age of 86. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, Sarah was extremely violent and had to be restrained for years. She eventually adapted to her life in the institution, but was deluded into thinking that she was a rich and grand lady. The hospital was her mansion, and her staff was her servants. When Sarah died of pneumonia, Cornelia Terry, who was David Terry's granddaughter, had compassion to see that she had a fitting burial in the family plot instead of being buried on the hospital grounds.
Now right over here you'll see this grave marker for Cornelia Terry, buried right next to David Terry, her husband. She was born in 1829, and she died December 16th, 1884, right next to this grand marker right here. The guy had a huge ego. Over here is Jefferson Davis, son of David and Cornelia Terry. He died in 1861 in his first year, so he was just a baby. Here's Frank D., also another son, died in 1854 in his first year. Here's another son named David. He died at the age of 17, 1873. I wonder what's up with the deaths of his children. None of them reached adulthood. So from the very historic Stockton Rural Cemetery, I want to thank you so much for joining us on this episode of History Hunters. We hope that you maybe learned something new. A lot of people don't know about the demise of David Terry. This is one of the functions of History Hunters, is to educate as well as entertain. We would appreciate it if you would leave us a comment and also hit the like button. Thank you so much.